Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf Samachet. The last, we will be finishing up today, God willing, the third chapter of Kiddushin. And so let me share my screen and we will get started. Yesterday, we concluded the daf with a question and an attempted answer that we rejected. So what was the question? We asked, how do we know that when a relationship is punishable by karet, Kiddushin is not possible? And then the implication would be, or possibly a co-implication would be, that the child will be a mamzer. Meaning that if, in fact, you have a prohibition that is subject to karet, or potentially worse, I guess, and so as a result, and yet the couple has the relationship and they have a child together, so then that negative impact will have will affect the nature of the child and result in that child being a mamzer, being effectively there is no good perfect definition because the term bastard suggests just some sort of out of wedlock, but there are only certain relationships that would result in this kind of situation, and some of those might not even be viewed by others as a problem. And the classic example of it would be if you marry one sister, divorce her, and then while the first sister is still alive, marry the second sister, ordinarily you might not have thought that that would be a problem, but in Judaism, that is in fact a problem, and the resulting child would be a mamzer because there would still be a prohibition to marry a wife's sister. So, in any event, as part of the answer that we rejected, we offered a couple of explanations of the pasuk in Devarim, Perek Kaf Daled, pasuk bet, where it says that she, in connection with the laws of divorce, it says, and she leaves his house, meaning the first husband's house, and goes and becomes a wife to another man. So she's going to marry somebody else. So why does it specifically say another man? The another is understood as suggesting that if it's not another, it's only when it's another that the marriage would take effect. But it would not take effect when it's somebody who's not another man. Well, who is not another man? So then it would be potentially relatives of the first one. But the final explanation that we offered was that the verse referred to the sister of one's wife, i.e., the wife can marry another man, but her sister cannot marry her husband. So although the overall answer we offered yesterday was rejected, we are going to continue to use this teaching, this understanding of Dvarim Perek Kaf Daled pasuk bet, that and we'll use it as we go forward. So I wanted to make sure to note it before we got started, because we will see it in a moment and we should have it in our minds already. Now we're going to pick up on the fourth to last line of Samach Zayin Bet 67b with Ella Amar Rabbi Yonah. And so let's pick up right there. Again, the Gemara is now going to provide a new source for the fact that Kiddushin does not take effect for certain relationships that are punishable with karet. So Ella Amar Rabbi Yonah. Rabbi Yonah says, here's the explanation. V'tem Rav Huna braid the Rav Yeshua. And some say, no, it wasn't Rav Yonah. It was Rav Yeshua, Rav Huna in the name of Rav Yeshua. Amar Kra, what did the pasuk say? The pasuk says, Kol asher ya'aseh mikol hatoivos ha'ela v'nichrasu. Anyone who commits any of these abominations, so the person doing so is going to be cut off from among their people. So the point is that we've now grouped all of these forbidden relationships, and so as a result, hukshu kol ha'arayot kulam la'achot isha. Well, one of them is achot isha, included in this all, and so as a result, or in this any. And so as a result, we're going to say that now we know the laws with respect to a wife's sister, because we have both the prohibition of a wife's sister and we have the prohibition that we said of somebody who leaves his his house and goes and becomes a wife to another man. So we have that another that is going to teach us that it's that even whether it's lichatchila or b'diavad, it's going to be a problem to it's going to be a problem for a man to marry his wife's sister as long as his wife is still alive, even if she's no longer married to him. So as a result, ma'achos isha lo tafsi b'kedushin, just as a husband cannot marry his wife's sister, and there would be no kedushin at all with her. Af kol arayot kulam lo tafsi b'kedushin. And again, we learn that there's no kedushin with her from the pasuk in Dvarim, that she leaves his house and goes and becomes a wife to another man. It's only another man whom the person can marry, not her wife's husband or her sister's husband. So ihaki, well, 1 second. If that's true, afilu nidanami. Well, one of the different arayot that are mentioned in the psukim in Vayikra, in Perek Yudchet in Vayikra, is the relationship with a nidah, that you're not supposed to have relations while your one's wife is menstruating. So alama amarabaye hakol. So in that case, that implies that a nidah should be treated the same way, meaning that that a nida is considered a kares prohibition. In which case, if you were to have relations with a nida and a child were to result, it should be a mamzer. But alama amar Rabbaye, but Abaye didn't say that. He said hakol modim. Everybody agrees. Everybody admits bival al hanida al hasota, that if one has relationship with their wife who is a nida or their wife who committed adultery, because a wife who commits adultery is no longer allowed to be with her husband. She'ein havlad mamzer. In those situations, the child is not a mamzer. Might not have been the right thing to do, but we're not going to treat the child as a mamzer. So Amar Chizki, Amar Kra. So how can we understand that? Meaning, why is this case of a nida an exception when it seems that we're including all of the items together? So Amar Chizki Amar Kra, Usehini Dasa Alav, that the pasuk says, and this is a pasuk in Vayikra Perek Tesvav pasuk Kavdalid, where it says that her state of nida should be upon him. So what does that mean? Afilu b'shas nidata tehei ba havaya, that even when she is a nida, she is considered capable of being kedushined with, of being with, meaning that the point is that the being verb in Hebrew is considered an aspect of marriage, and so as a result, we're going to say that that because we also have a pasuk with respect to nida, that pasuk with respect to nida tells us that nida is treated differently and is not, in fact, included in the general rule. Okay, but now michdi ikala kushe lenida ve'ikala kusha le'achos isha. Well, now we have two options, because you have just said we now have, of the list of arayot in Parak Yud Chet in Vayikra, we have two of them, whether it's a wife's sister or a nida, where we know what the story is. A wife's sister, we know there is no marriage, and as a result, there will also be mamzerut. And we know nida, there is marriage, there is the possibility of kedushin, and there is no mamzerut. So we have two possibilities, and now we have the aggregating word of any. And so as a result, we need to treat all of them like one category. And so as a result, so we could connect it either with nida, or we could connect it with this wife's sister. So machazis demakshas lehu la'achos isha aksha lenida. Why compare it to a wife's sister? Maybe we should compare it to a nida, and all of them we should say that there is kedushin and there is no mamzerut. So kula v'chumra l'chumra makshinan. No, when we have the opportunity to compare something to a more strict item or a less strict item, we're going to compare it to the more strict item. And Rashi says, helps us out here to understand what's going on. So let's take a look. It's 11 lines down in the narrow lines of Rashi. L'chumra, la sota vlad mamzer. We're going to say that this is machmir. And now here, there's a question, because what is the machmir situation? Because maybe the machmir situation, you could argue, is to allow the Kiddushin to take effect. Because if Kiddushin takes effect, then she's prohibited to every other man. But no, we're going to say l'chumra here means la'asot hablad mamzer, to say that the child is a mamzer. Shahamamzerut teluyin b'kedushin, because the mamzerut is connected and tied to the issue of kedushin. To call misha ein la alav kedushin havlad mamzer. Anytime we have a situation where there is no kedushin associated with the relationship, but there could be kedushin in another situation, then the child is considered a mamzer. Okay. So as a result, we now have effort number 2, and it has been successful. So we've got one proof for why Kiddushin does not take effect in certain relationships. Now we're going to bring a third effort. Again, first effort was not successful, that we had yesterday. Second effort has just been successful. So let's take a look. And we'll see if I can scroll down to the bottom of, no, it doesn't all fit in one page. So go to the third effort and let's take a look. So Michti, Rabbi Acha Bar Yaakov Amar, Rabbi Acha Bar Yaakov says, Asya b'kal v'chomer yivama, that actually we can learn that there's no kedushin between forbidden relationships from a kal v'chomer from the case of a yivama. Why? Because now, when a kedushin does not take an effect with a yavama, even though she's only forbidden with an ordinary prohibition, and this follows a particular opinion that says that a yavama cannot, in fact, get married to somebody else. So again, what happens? We have Ruvain and Shimon, who are brothers. Ruvain dies with Ruvain is married to Leah. Ruvain dies without any children, and so Leah is supposed to marry Shimon. But now, what happens if she tries to marry somebody out on the street, some John Doe, some Ploni Almoni? So it turns out that according to the opinion we're saying now, according to Rav Acha Bar Yaakov, there is no marriage whatsoever. The marriage does not take effect. So if that's true with respect to that, even though that prohibition only is lashes and not kares, so chayve misos v'chayve krisos lo kol shekain. Well, then any kind of situation where you're chay of something more, certainly the marriage should not take effect. Well, ihachi, 1 second. If that's true, if it's true that there's no that kedushin between a yavama and a third party does not take effect, even though we only have a lav, shar chayve lav and namin. Nami, why not learn from this fact that a marriage does not take effect between a yavama and a third party, not the party that she is zakuk to? So why not say that all those other prohibitions of lavim are also have no marriage associated with them? So amara papa chayve lavin behedjiksibu. No, we have a pasuk in the Torah that tells us that specifically marriage kedushin does take effect with respect to them, because what do we say? Near the end of Sefer Dvarim, we have the laws of in Parshas Kitetse that you go out to war and you see with immediately following the laws associated with a woman who is captive and you want to marry. So this has the rule that if you have two wives, one beloved, one despised, you can't preference the beloved woman's child over an earlier born despised woman's. So now the problem is that the Torah is like, should anybody be considered despised by God? Of course not. God loves all of God's creations. And should one be more beloved than anyone else? Of course not. Rather, beloved means that she was married in a proper manner, and Snua, despised, means she was married in an improper manner. The Kamarachmana, and the Torah is telling us, Kisiyana, that they're both considered his wives. So how could that be? Meaning it must be that one is married legally, appropriately, and one is married with a lav. And so as a result, we know that therefore lavim in general result in marriage taking effect. One second, Rabbi Akiva, the Amar Ein Kiddushin Tosim B'chayve Lavin. 1 second. So how is Kisi Yanabim My Mokim? Now we have Rabbi Akiva who says that Kiddushin does not take effect even when it's an ordinary prohibition, when it's just a lav. How is he going to understand this pasuk of Kitiyana le'ishtei nashim? Well, we can figure it out because he's going to say that it's talking about an almana lekohen gadol, because an almana marrying a kohen gadol, Rabbi Simai, Titania, Rabbi Simai Omer, Minakol Haya Rabbi Akiva Ose Mamzer, Chutzmil Almana LeKohen Gadol. That Rabbi Simai says that Rabbi Akiva considers all forbidden relationships to result in mamzerut for the child, with the exception of an almana who's married to a Kohen Gadol. And so therefore, the case that we're talking about of the despised wife is a wife of a Kohen Gadol who happens to have been a widow. And so as a result, that's what we're talking about in that situation. And so actually, Rabbi Akiva does have an explanation for Kitiyana Leish, Shtei Nashim, Shaharei Amra Torah. And how do I know that in fact the widow with a Kohen Gadol does not result in a mamzer? Because the Torah says, and this is in and this is in Vayikra Parakav Aleph Pasuk Tesvav, because it says Lo Yichalel, that he's not going to, that the Kohen Gadol is not going to cause his that the reason that he shouldn't marry such a woman, a widow, is so that his offspring should not become profane. So what does that imply? It implies chilulim oseh. He makes profaned ones. So his child will be a chalal or a chalalah. Ve'ein oseh mamzerut. But he does not, in fact, cause mamzerut in that situation, even though there's a lav. 1 second, though, there's another opinion. We just said that this explains the situation according to Rabbi Simai, but what about according to Rabbi Yeshevav? Because of Rabbi Yeshevav, the Amar Bo v'nitzvach al Kiva ben Yosef shahaya Omer kol she'ein lo bia b'Yisrael havlad mamzer. 1 second, because what about Rabbi Yeshevav, who was upset about Rabbi Akiva's broad application of mamzerut? Because he said, because as he describes Rabbi Akiva's opinion, that it's talking about any Jewish man who is not permitted to have relations with a woman, that child is going to be a mamzer. So that suggests that even in the situation of a Kohen Gadol with an almana, so hanikala Rabbi Yeshevav ila apukim into Rabbi Simai kaasi. Now, if you say that all he's coming to exclude is the situation of a widow with a Kohen Gadol, then okay, Shapir. It still can work out according to second. It can still work out because just a second. Simply as a kid, we can still say that the issue is that he's violating. There are still other prohibitions, other situations where marriage is not proper, because it could be a violation of a positive commandment, as we'll see in a moment. But Ella e time of if he's rather giving his own, and if you're telling me that actually Rabbi Yeshevav is saying that actually his own opinion is that Rabbi Akiva's view is even a chayve ase, even if there's a positive commandment that you cannot that causes you to not be able to marry. And what is that referring to? So, for example, when it comes to an Egyptian who's converted, you're not allowed to marry. It says that only the third generation may marry Jews. So that ends up being a positive statement, but implies a negative statement, meaning if you can marry a third generation, it means that you cannot marry a first or second generation convert who's Egyptian. And so as a result, so as a result, and therefore, b'may mokimla, what is left? Meaning, if in fact positive commandments are also considered to be, like according to Rabbi Akiva, situations of mamzerut, then how in the world are we going to say that there's a situation where a man can marry two women and one is going to be preferenced to the other? So Kohen Gadol. So maybe we could say that it's talking about a non-virgin, somebody who's had relations previously with a Kohen Gadol. That in that situation alone, that's the situation where Rabbi Akiva agrees that Kiddushin does take effect and the child is not a mamzer. But umayshna, so what's the difference between the legal Kiddushin of a Jew and an Egyptian, which according to Rabbi Akiva does not take effect, and the illegal Kiddushin of a Kohen Gadol and a non-virgin, which he concedes does take effect, meaning both have the same status of positive commandments. And so why are those two exceptions? So mishum dahabi le aseh she'ein shava b'kol, that in the end, he says that those are the prohibitions that don't apply to everyone. Those are just with respect to a Kohen Gadol. And so as a result, given the fact that we have to have some category where we're going to say that there's a preferred version of marriage and a less preferred version of marriage. So because Rabbi Akiva does recognize the pasuk of if a man has two wives, one who's beloved, one who's despised. And so as a result, and again, he also agrees to the statement that the beloved and despised must be in the nature of the marriage, because God doesn't hate anyone, doesn't prefer anyone to anyone else, because God shows no preferences. And so as a result, it must be that some situation has Kiddushin, and so we're going to apply the situation that has Kiddushin to the narrowest category. And the narrowest category are these rules associated with the Kohen Gadol. So Mishum Dahavile, okay, so again, so V'Rabbanan. So now, according to the rabbis, right, Ademoki la b'chayve lavin, Nokma b'chayve aseh. How did we say? How do we introduce this whole discussion? We introduced this whole discussion by noting that the pasuk of that a man has two wives, one beloved and one and despised, that showed that marriage does take effect with a wife who is who has a prohibition associated with her, a just plain lav, not a curry situation. Then there wouldn't even be marriage, but just a lav. We said that this pasuk shows that that's the case. But 1 second, maybe the pasuk is only referring to asay situations, positive commandment situations, like the Egyptian and like the Kohen Gadol with a non-virgin, and that's the situation that is being talked about here. And therefore, we can say that and maybe the rabbis should really agree with Rabbi Akiva that when it comes to a lav, an actual prohibition that is subject to lashes, that in fact, even the child in that situation should be considered a mamzer. So, hani chave ase b'mayin nindu. Well, 1 second. If you were to try to establish the pasuk of that a man has two wives, that pasuk should be talking about positive commandment situations, what would be the story? Ishtei and Mitzrayot, if you tell me that both of them are Egyptian wives, Shteim Tznuos, well then both of them are equally despised. And Iachas Mitzris Ba'achas Yisraelis, and if you say that one's an Egyptian and one is a Jew, a Jewish woman, well, Shtei Nashim mi'am echad be'inan. Well, the fact that we say Shtei Nashim, two wives, that on some level implies that the wives are both from the same people. So as a result, in order to be compared to somebody else, you need to be considered in the same category. And an Egyptian convert and a full Jew are not in the same category. And if we're talking about a non-virgin who's married to a Kohen Gadol, well, it's that miksiv tiyena lekohen. The pasuk doesn't talk about a Kohen. The pasuk is talking about a regular Jew, and so as a result, that doesn't seem to make sense. So that's why, according to the rabbis, they're going to say that it's not going to apply to positive commandments. It's going to apply to a regular negative commandment. Rabbi Akiva, well, 1 second, all that seems to make a lot of sense according to the rabbis. So why doesn't Rabbi Akiva agree with that? Well, because Bal Korchach Shivke Likra Dahave Dachik Umoki Anafshe. Well, he's stuck. That's why he doesn't have a choice as to how to interpret it, because he himself has already determined that all lavim result in mamzerut. And so as a result, he doesn't have any alternative but to say that we're talking about these positive commandment situations. Okay, and so as a result, we've now understood these psukim, and we have a third answer. Again, the third answer is that we're talking about a situation where we learn all of the other situations, all the other arayot in the Torah. We say that there's no Kiddushin between them because of a kal v'chomer from the case of Yevama, that just as she doesn't have marriage if she tries to marry somebody other than one of the brothers, unless, of course, she's already done chalitza. But without chalitza, any such marriage would not be valid. Now, by the way, I don't believe we hold that way, but in any event, that's the third answer according to that opinion. So we've now have two valid answers. And again, I think the second answer is the way that we actually hold. So now our Mishnah, we go back to our Mishnah, and our Mishnah had mentioned 4 different categories of relationships that produce children. The fourth involved a category where the women who cannot have Kiddushin with any men. And the Mishnah explained that that was talking about a Canaanite slave woman or a non-Jewish woman. In both those situations, that the woman is not able to marry anyone because there's no Kiddushin. Now, non-Jews may have some sense of marriage, but they don't have the Kiddushin aspect of marriage. And so as a result, we're going to, and so now, and again, the status of the child is like the woman. And this is the reason why if a non-Jewish woman marries a Jewish man, their child is considered not Jewish. That this is the source. So the Gemara now seeks a source for this rule, meaning how do we know that what our Mishnah says is accurate? So let's take a look. So again, that's the last category. Anybody who isn't able to marry anyone. So Shivcha Kananis Minalan. So we're going to look at them each individually. How do I know that a maidservant, a non-Jewish maidservant, is not able to have Kiddushin? So Amar Rav Huna, Amar Pra, Shavu lachem po im hachamor. When Abraham was going to the Akedah with Yitzchak, he had servants with him, and he says to them, listen, stay here by yourselves with the donkey. Now, why did he need to say with the donkey? So, im am hadoma lachamor, that this nation, that these people who are slaves, they are comparable to a donkey. And just as a donkey has no state of marriage, no ability of doing Kiddushin, so too a slave has no ability to do Kiddushin. So Ashichan delo tavse ba Kiddushin. All right, you've now explained that there's no Kiddushin, but how do I know Vlada kamosa minalan as we turn to Samachet Amabet? So how do I know that the child is like the mother? So Damar Kra Haisha Vilada Tiyela Doneha. When an Eved Ivri is married off to a Canaanite slave, where the Torah tells us that when the Eved Ivri goes free, he does not take the children with him, that the woman and her children all belong to the master. And so as a result, that shows that the children are like their mother. Okay, so we've now shown with respect to a slave woman, that the slave woman's child is going to be like a slave woman herself. So v'nachris minalan. How about a non-Jew? How do I know that that situation is also the case? So Amar lotus chatein bam. You shall not marry them. So this is a pasuk in Dvarim and Perek Zion pasuk Gimel of Dvarim. So and what's the story there? So we see that you're not allowed to marry them. So ashkachna delo tafsi b'kedushi. And when we say that you're not allowed to marry them, we're saying, and take a look at Rashi. I should note that here. 1 second. I did here. So Rashi says that we're now second line of Rashi in Samachet Amabed, Lo Tehei Lecha Bam Torah Chitun, that there won't be with you and them the laws of marriage. And so as a result, there's not going to be a sense of Kiddushin. So Ashkachna Delo Tafsi Ba Kiddushe, Vlada Kamosa Minal. And so, all right, you've again shown that there's no marriage. How do I know that in fact the child is going to be treated like the mother, meaning that she's going to be not, the child is going to be not Jewish? So Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, to Amar Kro, we've got a pasuk. And again, this pasuk, I believe, is in the same context, right? It's the next pasuk in the Torah, right? Ki Yasir Espincha Meacharai, that yes, that you're going to that the non-Jew is going to turn your son away from me. Bincha habam Yisraelit karoi bincha. What's our concern? Our concern is that if a non-Jewish man marries somebody's daughter, then that non-Jewish man is going to cause their son, the non-Jewish man and your daughter's son, to be strayed from God. But what did the Torah call them? Bincha habam Yisrael karoi bincha. The son of a Jewish daughter and this non-Jewish man is still called your son. So therefore, it must be that he's Jewish. But if we were to reverse the situation and say it's a daughter, a non-Jewish woman who's married to your son, well, then their child is not called your son, is not called your descendant. Ella binah, he's called her son, meaning not Jewish. And so as a result, we see that in fact shows that the child of a non-Jewish mother is considered not Jewish. So Amar Ravina, Shema Mina, Ben Bitcha, Habam Min Ha'ovid Kochavim, Karoi Bincha. That if you have the son of your daughter with an Ovid Kochavim, that person is still called your son. He's not Jewish. 1 second. We know that you're still violating some Torah prohibition. So Nema Kasava Ravina Ovid Kochavim ve'Eved Haba al Bas Yisrael Havlad Mamzer. After all, there's a prohibition associated with that relationship. So maybe we should say that if a non-Jew or a slave has relations with a Jewish woman, that the child should be considered a mamzer. No, not necessarily. All right, it's understandable that he's not fully kosher, this child, but mamzer lohavi, but he's still not going to be a mamzer. Pasul mikri. He's considered disqualified. He's considered some level of pasul, but we're not going to treat him as fully not Jewish. And how is this lesson? Meaning, what is this that we're going to say? Again, we can Rashi goes into more detail to give us a better understanding. So let's take a look at the Rashi. 1, 2, 3. Now we're counting up from the bottom. 6, 9, 12 lines up from the bottom of the narrow lines. Lema kasavar ravina ovekochavim ve'eved habal bas Yisrael havlad mamzer garsinan de'asal hashminan delo shadinan lei basar ovid kochavim. We've now seen that the child does not follow the non-Jewish father. Denema ovid kochavim. That we would say that he's considered a non-Jew. And so now if he becomes, and in which case if he converted, he'd be allowed to marry anybody in the community. We say that this child follows the mother. Now, because he was born in some sort of sin, Havala Yisrael Puzzle, we end up with he should be some kind of invalidity associated with him. Kishar noladim mimisha aina lav kedushin. And it should be just like the other situations where there's no Kiddushin. And in general, we say that if there's no Kiddushin and a prohibition, that that's considered a mamzer. And so as a result, I might have thought that it's a mamzer. And so we say, no, there's a new category. It's just a puzzle and not a full category of mamzerut. Okay. Well, hahu b'shiva goyim ksiv. Well, 1 second. All of that detail about not marrying a non-Jew, that was not a general prohibition about marrying non-Jews. It was a prohibition about marrying people from the 7 nations of Canaan. Shar umos minalan. How do I know that those same rules apply to every other nation of the world that isn't Jewish? So Amar Kra ki asiras bincha, that he's going to turn your son away. Again, that same pasuk, Perek Zion pasuk Dalid of Dvarim, that comes to include. It doesn't make a difference how, where the person comes from. L'rabo that kol hamasirim. It comes to include anybody who's going to turn your son away. Well, 1 second, Rabbi Shimon, that only works according to Rabbi Shimon to Darish time and Dekra, because he's the one who says that when the Torah gives us reasons for things, we can use those reasons to define the scope of the law. But El Rabbanan, the rabbis disagree with that. They say that when you have those reasons are not able to we're not allowed to use our own mind to figure out the application of the reason to determine the scope of the law. So my taima, in that case, what's the reason that we'd say that Kiddushin does not take effect with other nations of the world? So Amar Kra, va'achar kain tavo eleha uva'alta, that, 1 second, we can go back to the case of an Ashes Yifas Toar, of the wife that you want to marry that's going to be that's a beautiful woman who's a captive in war. Well, captive in war, we were talking about any war, not just a war with the 7 nations. And so as a result, Miklal demi kara lo tafsi be'kedushin. It's only after she goes through the entire process that you're allowed to marry her. But until she does that, marriage does not take an effect. So as a result, we'll say that in fact she is not married. So Ashkechan de lo tafsi be'kedushin vlada kamosa minalan. All right, so now you've shown that the marriage doesn't take effect. But how do I know that the child is also going to be just like her and not Jewish? So Amar Kra kisiyena leish v'yaldulo. If a man has 2 wives and they bore him children, what's the implication? Kol hecha de karinan be kisiyena karinan be v'yaldulo. That any time that the marriage takes effect, that's when the child will be his. But otherwise, whenever the marriage does not take effect, well then lo karinan be v'yaldula. Then we won't say that the children are his. Well, 1 second, if now from this teaching applies to all people who have no marriage associated with them. Well, if that's true, Shifcha Nami. Remember, we learned already that a Shifcha has no marriage associated with her because we said way back when that you have to stay by yourselves with the donkey. And so as a result, we learned that slaves, like donkeys, do not have the ability to do marriage. Well, once we have that, so then we don't need to have the pasuk that says that the slaves' sons stay with the master when the Eved Ivri is sent out. What do we do with the pasuk in Shmot, Parak Kaf Aleph, pasuk Daled? We don't need it for this purpose. So ihachi shifchanami, we can learn it from there. So ein hachanami, and we say yes, in fact you can. Well, in that case, ela ha'isha viladet tiyeh la'adoneh lamali. Well, now why do I need the pasuk in Shmot, Parak Kaf Aleph, pasuk Daled to tell us that the woman and her children stay to the master? So the Gatanya, it teaches us what we learned in a brisa as we turn to the top of Samachet Amud Aleph. And I think I said that we were going to finish the parak. I meant that we were going to just get to the Mishnah. We'll finish the parak, God willing, tomorrow. So Ha'omer l'shivchaso, that when one says to his, this is now quoting a brisa, if one says to the shivcha, Harei at bat chorin uvladach eved, you can go free, but your son is going to remain a slave for me. So then havlad kamosa, that the offspring, the child goes free also. Divrei Rabbi Yossi Aglili. That's what Rabbi Yossi Aglili says. The Chachamim disagree. Dvarav kayamim. His words stand. Mishum shenamar. After all, it says Ha'isha viladet tiyel that she and her child will be to the master. Now the Gemara then asks, 1 second, my Talmuda, how in the world does that pasuk that says Ha'isha vilada tiyel adonah, that she and her child will remain to the master, how does that prove that what the sages say, that the words stand? As Rashi puts it, my Talmuda, last of the wide lines at the top of Rashi on Samach Tet Amud Aleph, Heika Shaminan Mahai Kra Dvaro Kayamin. How do I learn from this that the master's words stand? It doesn't make any sense. So you know what? You're right. It doesn't make sense because that pasuk of Mishum Shenemar is not in fact proving the Chachamim's line, but rather Amar Rava Ad Rabbi Yossi Haglili. The Rava explains, no, that is going on Rabbi Yossi Haglili, as Rashi says in the top line of Rashi, not top narrow line of Rashi. Amar Rava Ad Rabbi Yossi Haglili, Hai Kra Ad Rabbi Yossi Haglili Kai. That it goes on Rabbi Yossi Haglili's statement. Vivlada Kamoha, that the child is like the mother. Mishum Shenemar. And why is the child like the mother? Because we have a pasuk that says Ha'isha viladat that the child and the mother get treated together. Meaning that if you free the mother, even if you try to hold on to the child will also go free. That is what Rabbi Yossi Haglili learns from that. Now we don't actually paskin like Rabbi Yossi Haglili, I don't believe, but in any event, that is what we would do with the pasuk. That is what we would use the pasuk for, according to the understanding of the fact that we don't need it for the shifcha. Now, so with that, we are now up to the next Mishnah, and again, we're talking about situations of genealogy. And so my apologies for not scrolling here. So talking about situations of genealogy. And so we talked about a situation where a child becomes a mamzer. And we noted that generally, if a mamzer is if one of the parents is a mamzer, then the child also will be a mamzer, because the second category in our last Mishnah said that if there is a prohibition and some sort of defect in one of the parents, well, then the child will have the same defect. And so as a result, a child of a mamzer will be a mamzer. So now the question is, how in the world can we get rid of that mamzerut situation? Well, for that, you're going to need to stay tuned for the next Mishnah, which is going to answer that question. But that will be on tomorrow's daf. I wish you a Shabbat Shalom. Have a great day. Look forward to continuing our learning together.
Thank you, Rabbi. That'll be interesting. Yeah. How do we get rid of that mamzer?
It's true. Good question. Have a great day.
Good question.